The squat is a really important movement, and it's one that's vital if you've got lower back pain. Both a bad squat can lead to lower back pain, and it can make recovering from lower back pain a real nightmare. And I'll give you a clue. Exercises like this are not going to help you recover from your lower back pain. Sure, it's horribly burning my quads right now, but it's not helping us learn to move correctly. Imagine if this wall wasn't here, I'd be falling backwards. So let's get into today's video. We're going to go through a number of steps to work from the ground up on your squats so you can start doing them correctly in ways that are going to be better for your hips, your knees, your ankles, your back, your core, your whole body. And you can start applying this movement to everything you do in life. When we're doing squats or when we're doing movements that involve squats, they really pervade into all aspects of our life. And when we've got back pain, even if it's very severe back pain, it doesn't matter what movement it is. It's getting up out of bed, it's getting onto the sofa, it's getting onto a chair, or getting in and out of those positions. They all involve squats. And if we cannot do them correctly, if we don't have the fundamentals, we're going to be making all of these areas worse. Our knees, our ankles, our hips, our back, and really stopping the recovery process, which means our muscles get weaker over time and we get ourselves further and further down the wrong path to recovery, away from recovery, and really make the job of getting ourselves back in shape much more difficult. Now let's get into the video. Okay, the first one we're going to be going through is going to be the ankles. So take your shoes off for this because it allows you to see things better. Sure, if you're wearing shoes, then it's going to play around and block some of these movements. But if we've got our shoes off, we can see exactly what we're talking about. So I'll demonstrate for you first of all with my ankle just like this, and then we'll do a couple of squats just so you can see what's happening at my feet, what's right and wrong. The first thing we want to bear in mind is the weight should come straight down into the ankle. The big mistake that we make here is we corkscrew in like so and drive pressure through the inside, our arches collapsing, primarily because we're normally leaning a little bit too far onto our forefoot. We're almost going up on the toes, and that's going to be because other areas of the squat are going to be restricting our range of motion, and we'll get to that really at the very end of the video where we talk about depth. But what we're talking about here with our ankles is keeping them solid. Focus your pressure through the heel part of the ankle. Yes, we've got the contraction here, but one little tip you can make when we're thinking of our feet first is just lift your big toe a little bit. If you're wearing trainers, just press it into the roof of the trainer itself, and that will help you distribute your weight correctly through the foot. It'll also help have positive impacts higher up the chain as well. So if we have a look at a few reps, just squatting incorrectly and correctly at the level of the feet. Stance needs to be correct as well, and that's going to play in other areas, particularly when we think about the thighs. But as we're squatting down, we've got that pressure through our heels, so the arch is not dropping in here. We're coming down like so, and we're coming back up. There's not really any change in the arch. All too often, this sort of thing happens. The legs wobble, the feet bow in, and all of a sudden we're putting pressure through the insides of our feet, and that creates trouble. You can see as I'm doing it here, it has impacts higher up, but this is going to lead to knee trouble. Now the reality is, when you're doing that sort of movement, you're probably doing that going upstairs. You're allowing that knee to wobble in, you're allowing that arch to drop in. And we think of repetitive going up and down stairs over many, many years. This can really lead to problems developing, just having a lack of awareness of what those feet are doing. So doing a couple of reps, maybe in bare feet, even if you normally do your exercises in your trainers, can really help you increase the awareness of what is going on at the level of this foot, so you can set the ground up right so everything else can follow from there. Because you could see on those examples, when my knee's coming in as a result of my ankle dropping in, we want to get the whole chain right. So as we work out, we get to the knees. The knees are really an important one. I wanted to pause to just take them a moment, because a lot of people that have problems with the lower back will also have some degree of trouble with the knees. And we saw from the previous little bit on the ankles, as we're going up and down stairs, all too often people let those knees roll in an incorrect manner. It strains the joints and the ligaments of the knee. It also strains the cartilage as well, because we start to put pressure through the outside of our knee joint rather than the inside. And that's really important because this relates so closely to the ankle, as you saw a moment ago in some of those movements. If we move the ankle, the knee moves with it. We need to make sure we get this right. When it comes to the knees, again, this, like the ankles relating to the knees, and there were some examples there or some relationship there, there's going to be some relationship to the hips in a moment. But as we're doing these squats in this position, I've got my feet quite parallel. I'll go through a wider stance in a moment because that's going to be relevant to you. But as we're going down, up and down, up and down, the knees are going the same direction as the toes. If we're going to take a wider stance, the knees again should go the same direction as the toes. They shouldn't be going like that. That is a classic mistake, especially when people take that wider stance. They end up going down, because down here, it requires a lot more muscle muscle strength to hold us here. As they get to a point where they're not quite competent anymore, when they go to push up, the knees come in and we go up. We're grinding through the outside of the knee joint here, putting pressure through the lateral meniscus. It's not built to be loaded like this, and we're stretching the inside ligaments of the knee. This creates real trouble, and you can see, if it's in view, my ankle and my foot has rolled in. The whole thing relates to one another. So you want to get those knees out. This is why some of the glute stuff is really important when you're working out and when you're working to strengthen your back, and make sure that no matter where those feet are, the knees are going in the same direction and they're staying really strong. So I didn't anticipate doing this video that it would get me quite so out of breath right now. Doing those kind of pulses and doing the video in a half squat position is quite tiring. So don't try this at home. Do 1 or 2 practices rather than endless ones. Now, we're gonna get onto the hips now. The hips are really, really important. As we saw just a moment ago, different people are gonna have different thigh lengths, thigh bone lengths. That's the femur. It's the bone that goes from your hips or from your hip socket all the way down to your knee joint. And depending on the length of this, compared to the length of your torso up here, you're gonna find that a different foot position is gonna work right for you. So morphology does play a real role in this. And as I said, leg length versus torso length is going to make a change. So you have to find what works for you. And it can be confusing if you're not made aware of that before you go and start doing your squats. You're gonna see different people doing different things and it looks quite different. So we have to bear that in mind. Now, if you've got a longer leg length and a shorter body, you're going to find doing a wider foot stance is going to work for you, because you're going to be able to go through the range of motion a little bit more in a more balanced way. If you are someone with longer legs, so my thigh bone here is a little bit longer than my torso, and you go for a narrow stance, you really find that as you go down, you need to counterbalance yourself quite a lot in order to do a parallel stance. Whereas if we go wider like so, preferably not on a slippy floor, on a nice sticky mat would be better. As we go down, we can go down with a lot more balance here, whereas I can't go anywhere near that low because of the length of my leg bones. So you need to find out what works for you when you're doing these. Do you have slightly more even leg bone to torso, or are you someone with very long legs and a shorter body? You're going to need to make that distinction for you. But as we're going through these, we want to use our hips. These are the primary drivers. They're strong in lots of ranges, and whatever motion we want to be in, we want to have that nice strong hip and just going down and back up, down and back up. Or if we're narrow, down and back up within the desired range of motion, really working on keeping those hips in the right position for you. Okay guys, now we get into the fun bit. We're going to be talking about the spine and the midsection. This part here, the lumbar spine, the danger zone, the area that we've got trouble in. When we're doing these squats, we want to make sure we have that nice lordosis, have a nice neutral curve, neutral position. We're not rounded over like so. Nice and strong here. The whole core forms a corset all the way around to provide stability to this section of your spine, so that as we go through the range of motion, through our squat, we're not getting in trouble. The big mistakes that people make here is they round their lower back as they're going down. They may not have mobility in certain areas, so they just think, well, lower is going to be better. So they come down like this, and that creates all sorts of trouble. It's not a good way to be doing our squats. We want to keep our core engaged nice and tight. We want to keep a nice neutral lordosis. That doesn't mean arching the back terribly. That just means neutral. We shouldn't stick our bum out or stick it in or anything like that. We just keep it nice and neutral, tighten everything up, and then go down through the range of motion. You are going to feel something here. These muscles in the lower back are designed to brace that lordosis. They're holding it in place. This is why it's so funny when people say, oh, you've got a reduced lordosis and your back muscles are in spasm, because the back muscles really accentuate that lordosis. They don't do that. So a bit of an inconsistency there, but we'll ignore that for the time being. We get a nice strong lordosis. These muscles, as we go down, are holding that lordosis. Once we get to a certain point, the hamstring inflexibility or flexibility limits are going to start to pull in that direction, and it's the job of your lumbar erector spinae muscles to hold the line, hold the fork, hold this position at the level of the lumbar spine, and therefore you might feel a degree of tension building as we get to the bottom. Feel that tension, feel what it feels like, and really feel when it starts to bite, because that's when you're starting to get to the bottom of the depth that you can do safely. And it's important to remember, with time, you're going to improve the depth with which you can go before that feeling kicks in. So next we're going to think about the thoracic spine, the mid-back, so to speak. And this is really, really important, because sometimes we're so focused down here that we forget about the upper back. Wherever the upper back and the head, which we'll get to next, is going, that's going to put extra strain on our body. This is why having a rounded kyphosis, when we have a back problem, is going to put more strain on here. So we want to pop that chest out And we should do that with our core engagement. So this whole part of your back is all interconnected, providing a good degree of support for the whole upper body from the hips all the way up. So our back muscles are engaged nicely. Sometimes it can be our hands right here, sometimes up here, sometimes holding a weight up here. For example, if we're doing some squats with a high band, we're holding something up here, our middle back is engaged. As we go down, we're not flopping forwards like so, we're keeping it nice and high, nice and tight. So before we get on to depth, we've got the very last one. We've worked from the ground all the way up. We're talking about the head here. This really comes in a little bit later on, to be honest, but some of you might be making these mistakes right now when you're doing simple squats, and that is the head position. We're always taught, look up, look up, look up, look up, but that can strain your neck and it's not natural. We want to keep a neutral spine from here all the way up. That's the whole spine is in its neutral resting position, braced, not part of the spine in neutral and the other part in a crazy extended position. That's not helpful. So when we're going through our squat movement, we want to keep the whole thing there. We want to just go down. It's okay to look down a little bit. It's not a problem, because as my hips pivot forwards, if my head is staying in alignment, I'm going to be looking down a little bit. I'm not like this, doing a squat, trying to look behind me. Okay, I'm up nice and tall. Quite equally, I'm not going down and then going like this to try and come up. Those sorts of movements, you'll see them all the time in the gym. You're going to strain your neck, or you're going to topple over forwards and do a roly-poly if you do the first one that I did. So it's very important not to forget that neck. When we do start doing things like maybe a back bar squat or some of the other squats, goblet squats up here, it can be tempting when you're working hard to look up to try and protect your back. But don't use your head to do that. Use your own muscles, and if you're having to force it that hard, you're probably working a little bit too much if you're having to get that head involved to try and get yourself back up. Keep everything neutral, come down, come back up, come down, come back up. That's the way you need to do it. This last one's going to be difficult for me because I'm going to have to somehow demonstrate it whilst not standing it properly so my head doesn't pop out of the frame, but hopefully you guys get the idea. Don't worry so much about what's going on in my upper body here. I'm doing this to really show you guys the depth. So first and foremost, when you're starting these out, go to a depth that you can maintain the principles through the entire body. So if that means you go to the kitchen table as a height and you're squatting like so, just so your bum touches the table and back up again with good form, focusing on your knees, your ankles, your hips, your back, your middle back, your head, then that's okay. That's where you start. The moment you start feeling you're losing the engagement, your head's moving, your knees are wobbling, all of those things, the moment you start seeing those, that's as far as you go. But with time, and again, once we've got the right position for our anatomy with our feet, with time, we'll be able to start going a little bit lower. And we can go quite low. Now, you can get to a point where you can almost collapse down, and depending on your leg length, again, I've got long legs here, it's very difficult for me to balance right at the bottom, and my back's going to round a little bit. I can sit down here. You won't be doing this through your training. That is not going to be helpful for you. You really don't want to do that. But going to a nice solid position where we can get close to 90 degrees maybe with our squats and really hold it there in this sort of position is going to be good. The back's nice and neutral. We're upright. The head is nice and neutral as well. And we're going to be able to go to some sort of range here. But you've got to work your range for you. Slowly start to build the depth. And this can take months. And really it should take months. You should be steadily continuing to build that depth, because at the end of the day, there's a sofa right there, which is down about here. Many of your beds will be around about here. If you can't do an effective squat to squat down as low as some of your household chairs, household benches, then you're going to get in real trouble. So we've really got to make sure that we're working our squat depth. Over time, it takes a long time for these things to change because you're having to build muscle in these legs. But the only way to do it is to do it. And the more you do, the more you will do. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Hopefully it's given you some things to consider. Hopefully it's made you think about those squats, and you've got some practical tips that you can use to go forwards and make these movements, these unavoidable movements, safer from a point of view of your back, your knee, your hips, your ankles, the whole thing. Hopefully you did learn something from this video. If you did, let us know in the comments. What was your major takeaway from this video? You know, or maybe other than that squats are a little bit harder and we shouldn't do too many pulse squats, otherwise you're going to get out of breath. Hopefully you did find this helpful. If you know someone else that's struggling with their back pain, struggling to rehabilitate, maybe even just they don't have back pain, they're just squatting in the gym and they're not doing it so well, or they're squatting at home and they're not doing it so well, share this video with them. Hopefully you'll teach them something new. And as always,
Give us a thumbs up if you find it helpful. Consider subscribing to the channel so you can stay up to date when we release a new video. And thanks, as always, for watching us. We'll see you in another one. And my main takeaway is get a wider lens, because having to do those squats and talk to you guys was a real challenge.